What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 312. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, how goes, sir?
It's going well. I'm ready to get some limited resources in before Thanksgiving. So
yeah, pre-Thanksgiving
we're recording a little later, earlier in the week. Look, I just want to be conscious for limited resources, and I fear that after Thanksgiving I will not be.
Yeah. How are you making your turkey?
I'm actually gonna smoke it in a smoker.
Jeez, playing correctly. I've had a smoked turkey. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, it's gonna take a long time, but hopefully it'll be worth it. We'll see.
I'm deeply jealous. All right. So before we get into everything on the show, I want to remind you about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. A lot going on over at CFB lately. Huey tokens, they're out. So they're going to start being included in your orders now. So you might get yourself on a new Huey token, which is cool. I certainly want to get one of those, and I'll make him sign it probably too. And the countdown to Black Friday is on. It has started, and you can get deals on selected sealed product and supplies leading up to Black Friday, where the list will expand from not just sealed product and supplies, but also select Magic singles. Now, all of the sale items will be limited quantity. So you're encouraged to check out the site early on these days to make sure that you get the best possible deals. And as always on CFB, you will find a full selection of single sealed product supplies at their regular awesome prices, as well as free content. And I know that this is one of the big reasons that I went to Channel Fireball all the way back in the day, was to read the articles. And as the videos started to come out, I know CFB was one of the kind of pioneers for videos and draft videos and stuff. And I watched those all the time. And, they helped inspire me to do my own. And they're still there. You can find a lot of awesome content from some of the best players in the world every single day on channelfireball.com. The show is also brought to you by you. The Patreon is how you can support us directly if you would like. And Luis, we got a little business to take care of here, my friend. We do giveaways. I've been giving away a bunch of stuff. I love giving away stuff to our patrons and as a way to say thank you. And we've got a couple of winners this week. We are giving away another Delver of Secrets playmat. That was from Grand Prix Seattle Tacoma. And the fine folks at Channel Fireball and Cascade Games gave me 4 playmats to give away. This will be the third one that I'm going to be sending out. And I had another one that I was giving away before. So we're giving away a total of 5. And the winner for the Delver playmat this week is Morgan Davis. Thank you so much, Morgan. Your patronage is much appreciated, and I will be sending out a Delver of Secrets playmat to you this week. And we've got another giveaway, Luis. This is a big one. Remember a few weeks ago when we opened up that Steam Vents in the Air? How cool is that? And I've got it here. And also we have an Ob Nixilis Reignited. As many of you know, for the Crack-A-Packs that we do on the show, I give away all the cards that we open up from it, or at least all the rares. And it's time to give away this Steam Vents, Luis, and I got to say I'm a little sad to see it go. The thing is gorgeous. It is pack perfect. I put it right into a sleeve right when we opened it up, and it's just...
Look, I'm just jealous that someone else opened an Expedition and I didn't, because I still haven't opened one of those, so
if I complain that I've opened 2 Expeditions, but they were both the same one, that's not really going to fly.
Oh, no.
Okay, I won't do that then. All right, so we've got our giveaway for this. The winner will also receive, this is our kind of monthly giveaway or so that we do. They'll receive a couple packages of limited resources, sleeves, and a sticker and a button as well for being so supportive. The winner, John Turbot. So, John, congratulations. You, sir, are going to get an Expedition Steam Vents sent to you along with some sleeves and stuff.
You can admit it, Marshall. The only reason you picked this winner is because of their address.
So it was really funny, Luis. So I use a randomization website app thing to pick the winners, because it's a lot of names that get punched in. And so I did it, and this name come up, John, and I put it in the thing, and I have the address there. And what I do is I'll write the address down on like a sticky note and put it on the thing that I need to send it to. So I'm writing down John's address, and I get halfway through and I'm like, really? So he's put that he lives at Manowar Place. And so, John, I'm going to need an email from you, lr@lrcats.com, with your actual address. So I do appreciate that you live at Man of War Place. And I wanted to say congratulations, John, on the Steam Vents. And again, thanks so much for your patronage. We will be doing a Crack-A-Pack today, and that'll be adding into the next purse.
Just so you're aware, that's an actual place.
Is it really?
I just Googled it.
I don't believe you. Is it really? Please say he actually lives at a place called Man of War Place.
To some degree, we're saying this guy's address on air. But
I don't want to give any more
address.
info. Like, we're not going to say what city, country, state he lives in. But is it real?
Apparently.
That's incredible. Wow. Yeah.
He deserves to win just for that.
I agree 100%. And also now I want to visit him. So that's really funny. I totally thought that was a joke, that he was just messing around with me. But yeah, so the Crack-A-Pack that we do on this week's show will go to the next one. And we'll just keep giving them away. And I'm always on the lookout for cool stuff to give back to our patrons. Patreon question of the week. This is one of the bonuses that you get for being a patron, is that you can go on the thread on the Patreon. It's a little buried now, I will admit, but it's got so many good questions in it still that I haven't started a new one. I probably will copy paste all the questions into a doc and then start a new one at some point. But at any rate, you do get to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. And this one comes from Niall Bowl, who asks, I also missed, so he mentions that, he or she mentions, I should say, that they couldn't find the the thing either, so I'm glad I said that. All right, the question is, drafting on Moto is great because you can see your picks and basically build your deck as you go. So I find it much easier to keep on track, watch my curve, avoid picking too many 5-drops, etc. In paper, though, I've had drafts that I thought were going brilliantly until I realized that my black-white life gain deck had 4 Colostria Nightwatch and not enough ways to gain life. How do you manage when drafting in paper? Is it just a matter of practice, or are there techniques that might help?
It's kind of both. First of all, practice definitely helps, just like with anything. The second is that because you're able to look at your packs in between, or look at your cards in between packs, what I tend to do is I tend to sort my cards in between packs as quickly as I can, and then look at what I have laid out, and take note of things that stick out. Like, hey, it's pack 1. I have 3 5-drops. I need to cool it.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I actually only have 1 enabler for this theme that I think I'm in, so I need to make sure. And the other thing you can investigate is, like, let's say you think you're drafting, blue, black, devoid, and at the end of pack 1, you realize you have like 3 blue cards, 4 colorless cards, 1 actual good black card, and 1 mediocre one. And then you have to think, like, I'm not actually blue-black. You should reassess. And that's something that you could do online as well. But I think, just taking the time to really kind of check your assumptions. And in this particular case, you get to do it in between packs instead of during the actual draft. But you get used to it, and as long as you're using your time efficiently in between packs, you should be okay with that.
Yeah, 2 things to say. One of them is that, if you do draft on Magic Online a lot, you can practice it. I mean, I know players have just taped up a piece of paper over their picks and said, look, I'm not looking. I'm just going to have to memorize this. And I think that that's a reasonable way to just get your brain trained on not just staring at your picks the whole time. Also, I want to mention that, most local drafts, like a Friday Night Magic draft or a more casual draft, a lot of them play with similar rules where you can look at your pack in between anyway. Like, a lot of shops are pretty casual about that. So, this is the kind of ththing that you'd want to gear up for if you were going to play a higher level event like a PPTQ, an RPTQ, or a GP or something like that. Where, you're going to be doing a timed draft and you're absolutely not able to look at those cards in between. So make sure that, like, that's on your horizon if you're going to be practicing this. Because if all you do is draft on Magic Online, then, like, whatever, probably not worth it to put the time in. And then I wanted to say that, Luis, you hit what I think is the most important trap that you can fall into, which is not necessarily, well, how many 5s do I have, or do I have enough 2-drops, but of thinking, okay, I first picked a really good black card, and your brain just triggers that you're in black. And then as you go through the pack, you can pick up a whole bunch of blue cards, maybe 1 other black card, and 2 good red cards that are a little bit later. And you, in your brain, if somebody walked up and said, what colors are you? You'd say, I'm blue-black. But the truth of it is that you're probably closer to blue-red at this point because blue seems more open. You've only got one other card out of black other than the card you first picked. And it's really easy to get tripped up on that and to not remind yourself. So the thing that Luis said and that I want to reiterate is when you go to your pack in between, make sure you're open-minded about what colors you're actually in. Don't shoehorn yourself and figure that, you know, I'm stuck in these colors just because it is easy for your brain to go down that path. And then without the reinforcement of being able to actually see the cards as they unfold, you can stay on that path even though you shouldn't be on it. All right, so let's get a crack-a-pack in here. I got a special one here for you, Luis. So our friend Boostkilla on Twitter gave this to me at the GP. And he said, give this to LSV so that he can open it in front of you. And I am not going to honor him. I am going to open this for a crack-a-pack, so take that. This is one for the good guys. Sorry, Boostkilla. Nice try, though.
I'm not really into wasting packs, so I'm not going to be randomly opening packs this episode.
You know, I don't want to encourage you anymore, but, like, I was at the Grand Prix, and I had a long day at the GP. It was a long, tough work day, and I was getting ready to go to sleep. And I saw that you had been streaming, and I thought this will be nice. You know, I'll watch Luis's stream for a while, and I'll kind of relax, and then I'll just, you know, shut the laptop and fall asleep. Well, as it turns out, I fell asleep a little before shutting the laptop, and I was kind of dozing off, and, you know, Rashad was teasing me for it or whatever, but it didn't matter. I would wake up at some point. I just had the laptop on my chest, and I was laying in bed. And then I hear this noise, and I wake up, and I'm like, what is... Like there's some horrible noise happening, you know, what is that? And I look, and you somehow on your Magic Online stream had just reached into some box, pulled out a pack and just started cracking it. And I'm like, what the hell are you, like, why? This isn't a nightmare. This is my reality. And of course I look in the chat and everybody's like, oh, Marshall's going to be mad, or, you know, they're saying funny stuff. And you even said my name and I'm like, what is going on? And so I type stuff in the chat and then they're just, you know, blowing up because they're like, he's here.
No, because it was like, I knew you were at the GP. I knew you were doing coverage. I got goaded into against my will opening packs on stream.
Are you kidding?
And it was like it was summoned you. It's like opening the pack. It's like your ears perked up.
It's exactly what happened.
It's like it was like a bat signal, and then all of a sudden you're just in the chat, like, you know, kind of expressing your displeasure.
Yes.
It was pretty great. I will admit.
It was funny. I laughed. I was laughing in the bed, and then I did go to sleep. All right, so here's our pack. First up is Royal Mage's Trick. No.
Nope.
Dutiful Return. No. I'm going to kind of cruise through these ones. You know, we get to the later part of the set, and, you know, I feel like we can kind of just say no to cards and keep it moving. Swell of Growth, negative.
Still no.
Dispel.
Nope.
All right, we finally got one.
It's a good sideboard card.
It is. We finally have a card that I would actually consider picking. Nettledrone. So
yeah, Nettledrone's right in that uncanny valley of cards you can't be too unhappy when you first pick, but you're also not very happy about.
Agree. Yeah.
It's right at the inflection point of like, wow, this is terrible. I have to first pick a Culling Drone. Not, wow, this is great. I get to first pick an Eldrazi Sky Spawner. It's in between those things.
Yeah. Well, this is Nettledrone though.
Yes, I know. Culling Drone's the bad one.
Okay, gotcha. And this is in between.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Kite Sail Scout. Courier Griffin.
Kite Sail Scout, it belongs on the list of cards I say that you shouldn't play and then immediately play. I don't know how this ends up happening to me. I swear, I have the best intentions. We'll do an episode about Sealed, I'll lay out my strategy, we'll do an episode about Kite Sail Scouts, I'll say never play them, and then next thing you know, I've just got 5 Kite Sail Scouts in my deck, or I'm playing
at a Grand
Sacrifice
Prix.
and Sealed.
Yeah. Courier Griffin.
All right, Courier Griffin's a card.
It's not as good as Nettledrone.
I would take
right?
Nettledrone first over Courier Griffin.
Yeah, same.
But Courier Griffin also is very much in the same category of cards you definitely don't want to first pick, but you're not completely broken up about.
Yeah, I agree. Smite the Monstrous.
Another fine card.
Yeah, I still like Nettledrone over it, but it's you know, kind of makes you think. How about Stone Fury?
Stone Fury is pretty strong. It's the kind of card you don't want millions of because it's a 5-drop, but it goes into any red deck and it is just perfectly acceptable. So
yeah, now here's the interesting question, right? Nettledrone or Stone Fury?
I would take Nettledrone early.
I would too.
I think that the
I
Devoid
like it
deck,
because it's cheaper too.
it's cheaper, which means that you're punished less for taking them. If you take cheap cards early, then later you can take cheap or expensive cards and be okay. If you take expensive cards early, you just have to take cheap cards later. You just don't have a choice. And then Nettle Drone goes into the Devoid deck quite well, which is most of the red decks you're going to draft that are good are Devoid decks. I really don't like red green landfall decks, so I'm not really into that.
Agree. Undo Greathorn. No, that poor guy. I don't really see anything wrong with this card, but I almost never run it.
So it's pretty brutal to have the name Great in your name and then just not be great in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think Undo OK Horn didn't really fly. Unified Front.
Another card which has underperformed for me. It's a fine card. It's good in the Converge decks. It's good in the Ally decks, but you really just don't want to beat those decks, especially the 3-color versions.
Yeah, my thoughts on it, coming into the format were this card's really good because it makes 2 to 3 allies, maybe 4 if you go off. But let's say it makes 3 allies, by the time you end up casting it. And I thought to myself, okay, this is good because, would I pay 4 mana for 3 1/1s? Yeah, okay, not great, but it's okay. It's a reasonable floor. And then the ceiling I thought would be insane, right? I would get multiple triggers from all these different allies all at once, and it would just be this absurd blowouts some percentage of the time. But the problem is it hasn't lived up to that. It just doesn't quite deliver on either metric, and that's really brought it down a bit for me. That said, I think it's fine. I don't have any issue with it, but I'd rather take Nettle Drone over it. Rot Shambler, the half truth.
Yeah,
more like quarter truth.
It's more like a little white lie. So
it really is.
It definitely doesn't get there. Rot Shambler's just not in the right deck.
Jeez, and this is coming from you, king of the the sacrifice deck. Horribly Awry.
Horribly Awry is a card I actually like. It fills out your curve kind of nicely. It is not it's not a bad card. It also enables the various processing and ingest deck.
Horribly Awry is in the front runner for the Sunset Show for me on card I have to read every time.
Oh.
I'm always like, what is it? It's creature and it's 4 or less, right? And then I look and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, sweet. It's creature and it's 4 or less. But I, for some reason, just always second guess myself about if it counters bigger things or smaller things.
Oh, well, that card for me is Malakir Familiar because for whatever reason, the first time I read Malakir Familiar, I assumed it worked like Bloodbond Vampire and got a +1/+1 counter. Instead, it just gets +1/+1 until a turn. These two cards are very, very, very similar and just work quite differently.
Yes.
And I still just think the card gets counters.
Yes.
I still do because that's just how my brain locked it in. And if you're not aware of by now, your brain is very, very lazy and it uses every shortcut imaginable. You could actually learn something from that. But it's locked in on Malakir Familiar doing that thing. And
I know, man.
It sees no reason to reevaluate that position. So I frequently think the card does that. But back to Horribly Awry, I think it is worse than Nettle Drone, even though I do like the card.
Yeah. Our rare is Nissa's Renewal. So that's the 6 mana sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 basics, put them on the battlefield, tap, and you gain 7 life.
Yeah, not a card I'm really excited to take early, though. It is a card I've actually played and been happy with, especially in sealed.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm taking Nettle Drone out of the pack. I don't like Nissa's Renewal much, but I kind of view that as a sadness point because I was kind of hoping that this would be the format that I could play a card like Nissa's Renewal in and feel good about it. And it's not. It just didn't end up being that. So, yeah, I wish it were, but it isn't. So I'm taking Nettle Drone and moving on with my life here. Okay, so that does it for the Crack-A-Pack, which is going to bring us to our main topic. Now, we've got a pretty important and broad topic to cover for you this week, and we wanted to kind of keep the level up train rolling along here, and we're going to talk about leveling up in any format. Now, what we mean by this is how do you master a format? Right? How do you get to the point? What are the steps? What are the things that you need to know, the things that you need to do before you get to the point where you have mastered a format? And, by mastered, it doesn't mean that you're perfect. That's never going to happen. But what it does mean is you're completely comfortable. You know the archetypes. You sit down to draft it. You feel confident. when you're playing the games, you feel like you have a good idea of what your opponent's up to. You have a good idea about the kind of cards that they might be playing in a given different scenarios in the game, what kind of game plan they're going to be doing and how to stop it. What are the good sideboard cards? All of that kind of stuff. And we're going to cover this on the show for you this week about what it takes to get to that point. What are the check boxes that you need to hit before you can look at it and say, I've mastered that format. That is a format that I have down cold, and I'm going to do it. Because if you don't know what you need to do, how the heck are you going to do it, right? You're just going to draft a bunch and kind of get better at it as you go, but there may be things that you're neglecting, or there may be tasks that you could be putting yourself to really try to kind of, again, scratch off the list and get yourself to that stage where you really feel like you've mastered a format.
And I do want to note too that a lot of what we're talking about here today is coming from the kind of thread that I started on the LRcast subreddit, where we're interested in learning about topics for level ups. So we took a number of people's suggestions and kind of folded them into this topic. So.
Yeah, and thanks for that, by the way, everybody that replied on that. That kind of stuff's great for us.
Definitely, I'd encourage people to actually still post things there, because even though the tendency on the subreddit is once a thing falls off the front page, kind of ignore it. But I bookmarked it. I'm gonna look back on it. We're gonna discuss things from that for the next weeks and months, because it's not like we're gonna just every week do a level up show. So that's a good place to just drop potential topic suggestions, and we'll make of them what we will. So
yeah, I totally back you up on that. I think that's really great, and hearing especially from that group of our listeners, that. The subreddit is made up of some of our most passionate and committed listeners, and they're, that is in many ways the group that we want to appease, right? I mean, those are the LR faithful, and we want to make sure that group is getting what they want. And I think that by doing that, we end up pleasing the audience as a whole. Okay, where should we start here, Luis? Because we've got a lot of things to hit and a lot of questions that need to be answered before we get to the end of how you actually master a format. So where do you want to start?
I think that it's probably good to go from like general to specific. That's I think that the sort of approach I like to take, and
okay.
that means starting at like metagame knowledge and figuring out kind of like what are the broad strokes, because this is not worrying about any specific cards or even archetypes, but just like what are the truths that you kind of run into in between the different decks, and what do you in general expect to see. Format speed is a big one. How fast is the format? Is it a format where the games, you frequently end by turn 7 or 8? Are they ending by turn 9 or 10? This is the sort of thing where we didn't used to have as much information about that, but now the advent of Magic Online and then analytics actually gives you a little bit more clues. Like formats these days are trending between like around 9 turns. And some of the formats are a little faster, around 8 turns. Some of the formats are a little slower, like 9.5 turns or what have you. But that's just part of it. I mean, it's also like what happens if you don't play something on turn 2? Like how important are 2-drops? And that goes all the way up. And the examples I think we're going to use today are 2-drops and 7-drops, because those are kind of the two poles of the format, or normal cards. Obviously, Battle for Zendikar has 10 drops and has 9 drops and has 8 drops. And these are all playable. And then some formats have a lot of 1-drops, though that's pretty rare. But in general, a really good rule of thumb is how important are 2-drops, how important are 7-drops, and then that you can kind of derive what's in between based on that.
Yeah, and I think that, historically you can look back and this is a good, I think, format speed is the place to start, because, if I walk up to you, Luis, and I say, dude, they're doing original Zendikar drafts on Magic Online and I've never drafted the format. What do I need to know? The first thing you're going to say is the format's fast, right? Like that's the headliner for any given format. If I come up to you and say, dude, Rise of the Eldrazi, never drafted it. What do? You say, look, it's a slow format. You're going to have a lot of time. And this is sort of the thing that, at least for my mind, it comes as the most important thing is, what is my general approach? Because that's going to inform a lot. It's going to inform all the way down to specific examples, like you just used, Luis, with 2-drops or 7-drops, which I agree are kind of the poles. Like we rarely play 1-drops. We almost never play 8 or above, in most formats. There's exceptions always. But, that's kind of like, can I actually cast a 7-drop in this format? Because we've certainly seen formats that were too fast and made it so you really couldn't reliably cast even very good 7-drops. And then we've also seen, the other side of the spectrum where two drops were kind of like, yeah, you don't really want those in your deck because they don't have enough power. Like they don't affect the game enough. So you'd rather skew things up a little bit higher, Rise of the Eldrazi being an example of that. And, to me, once you know the general speed of the format, now that's going to tell you a lot of things about the format otherwise. If I tell you the format's fast, you know that 2-drops and early curve and that kind of stuff's important. Whether you're the one beating down or whether you're trying to avoid being beaten down yourself, you are going to need things to do in the early part of the game. If I tell you it's slow, you're going to know to deprioritize that early game stuff, because if the games end up going long, a lot of it's going to come down to who casts more powerful spells. And since the game's going longer, you're going to have more time to actually set up the more powerful stuff. So wasting your time on a 2-mana 2/2 with some marginal upside isn't going to get you where you need to go. And this is all information that I can glean from, like me coming up to you, Luis, and you saying this format's really fast or this format's really slow. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, is that most formats fit in the middle, right? Most formats aren't on the extreme poles of Rise of the Eldrazi or Zendikar, and they end up being somewhere in the middle. But all of them skew somewhere. And so that starts to help get your mind in a framework where you can start to approach these more specific questions as we go down the list.
Exactly. And that's why I start at the outside. When I ask you, how good is 5-mana draw 3 cards, right? Like, let's say you're talking about Insight of Ugin or Ugin's Insight, but even minus the scry part. What if it's just 5-mana draw 3 cards? Mm-hmm. Some formats it's great in, and you're just going to first pick it and be very happy. And some formats you're like, I really don't want that card. That just does not do anything for me. Like, it would be borderline unplayable, if not actually unplayable in Zendikar, and it'd be a straight up bomb in Rise of the Eldrazi. We're gonna shorthand to Zendikar and Rise as fast and slow, because those are just kind of the two extremes.
Yeah.
And without knowing the speed of the format, it's really hard to evaluate these cards. It's part of what makes set reviews difficult, is we can look at the cards and we can try to guess how they all fit together, but without actually playing the games, it's sometimes less clear about how the kind of the marginal cards fit in, or the situational cards fit in. So
yeah. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say that kind of leads to where sets fall, and another way of saying it is on the Cabs Uber spectrum.
Yeah, right. And I mean, we use that kind of,
we use it
half joking, but it's
because
like
we don't want to get too jargonified. But
right.
Basically,
it's jargonified.
Oh, my bad.
I don't know if that's true.
That's definitely a word. Basically, you want to know whether drafting the 2-drops plus 3-drops plus combat tricks deck is good versus is good to draft the card draw and 7-drops nonsense. Again, it's not just one or the other, and it's not like a format only one of these 2 decks can be playable at the same time. There's definitely formats where both exist and both are good, but seeing which way decks tend towards is really important, and that lets you know whether 2-mana 2/2 no text in some formats is great, and you'll third pick it and not be unhappy, and in some formats it's straight up unplayable. And right. without knowing. Not only knowing the answers to these for a specific format, but knowing how to look for them and why the format ends up the way it does, you're going to just make worse picks in that format. And as the formats go on, you tend to get a better sense of where things fall. And a lot of that is not just how does this card play, it's just like, what does the format look like?
Right. Yeah. And these are, these are things that you get as you get more experience with Limited, but they're important questions that you should be asking. And if you're not, you're probably selling yourself a bit short. Another axis that you can put, you mentioned the Cabs Uber style thing as one way to sort of frame it in your head. Another one is this a synergy based format, or is this more of an individual card power level type thing, right? And those are similar concepts to the Cabs Uber thing, but it's really important, right? Great example is the set that we have now, Battle for Zendikar, right? This is a thing. Some sets are going to lend themselves to getting in your lane and sticking in it. And sometimes even taking cards of comparably much lower power level in order to satisfy like getting critical mass of some attribute of, getting yourself enough artifacts or some tribal synergy, enough elves or whatever. What matters, right? You have to ask yourself, where other sets, they're going to value taking the highest individual power level cards that you can cast, right? And you're going to want a mana curve, 2 colors or whatever. And then the question is just, what are the best cards, individually speaking? And then you have to sort of, put those together into a cohesive deck. But it's less about synergies between the cards as you play them and more about individual card quality, where the synergy-based decks is often, that's not the case at all. And you're going to need to know that. And you're going to need to have a really good understanding of where the set fits. Battle for Zendikar is heavily synergy-based for the most part. There's a few exceptions. And if we go back in time just a little bit to like Origins or even Dragons of Tarkir draft, those ones were much more skewed towards individual card power level with some synergies built in as well. And, you know, as you go back, if you look at Origins, I would say that was closer to individual card power level type set, where if you go back to Dragons, it was closer to that end of the scale, but a little bit further in. There was a few more things that you could kind of set up to make the decks that you wanted to work. But you need to know, what is this set asking me to do?
So some ways to look for that are uncommons. Uncommons tend to be the drivers of a lot of the synergy decks. Certainly the commons are important too, but the uncommons are the ones that tend to be a slightly more complicated, like build around type cards. Like in Origins, those are like the Girper Aether Grids of the format, or you're looking at cards in Battle for Zendikar. Something like Vampiric Rites is a good example of what looks like a powerful engine. Unfortunately, there's no hard and fast rule to know like which ones are going to be good and which ones aren't. Aether Grid was in fact quite bad. That was not a card worth building around, whereas Vile Aggregate is really, really good. But a good rule of thumb is if the build around uncommon for whatever theme you're thinking about is not good, that deck tends to not be great, because that's where so much of the power level is. The commons are relevant too. Like the commons for Battle for Zendikar that are impactful here are like, you know, Blister Pod and Bone Splinters for the Black Green Sacrifice deck, which I'm using as an example of something not working out because I don't think that deck is good, versus the commons like Mist Intruder and Merc Strider, which, you know, clearly did work out. Devoid is a great deck. And we can't say beforehand which ones are going to be good. You can make guesses. Like Benthic Infiltrator is a perfect example of a card we knew was going to be good. Because even if that deck wasn't good, it's a good card. 3-mana 1/4 blockable is a great card. But the fact that the powerful uncommons in some of the decks didn't work out, and the fact that the commons didn't work out, like, you have to know which ones to look for. And looking for the synergy-based ones to see where those landed gives you a really good idea of how good they are. And I know I started out, you know, in Origins taking some of these build-around uncommons and just routinely being disappointed. So I was able to figure out, well, this is just not where, you know, these decks just don't generally work. It's not really a draftable archetype. And sometimes you'll even have rares. You have to value it this way. And sometimes the rares are powerful enough that they drive a deck by itself only if you open that specific rare. But that just means you can't go into a draft thinking you're going to draft that deck. You just have to open that one rare. You know, like Sigil of the Empty Throne in Origins that makes a 4/4 every time you play an enchantment. That was a card that could end up great. But because that deck generally wasn't such a synergy-based deck, it's not a deck you could really go hardcore on because it didn't come together all that often. You can't first pick that. You can't go into the draft thinking, I'm going to get a Sigil because that card's just a rare. Whereas sometimes you'll get a Devoid rare and it's just great. And you're just really happy, you know, playing with these cards and just getting there on them, even though it's just it's a rare that's great, but it's part of a deck that's also good. So you don't have to assume that it's going to be coming or build a plan on it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because, you know, the whole focus of this is you need to know this in order to really have mastered a set. But the question is, well, how do I get to know this? One way to do it is just to draft a bunch. You'll just figure it out. You'll listen to a podcast, you'll talk to your friends, and it'll kind of come to you. But you know what? There are clues that you can take ahead of time. And Luis and I take these clues when we go into the set review and try not to overdo it, right? Because you don't want to assume something too early in a format without having actually seen it. But at the same time, it does behoove you to say, you know, look at this. We've got some pretty strong hints here. One of them is you can just look at the mechanics as they come in from R&D, basically, right? Like they say, well, what is this set all about? And you need to evaluate each mechanic. If you're told by the people who are making the set that this is all about tribes, it's a pretty safe bet that this is not going to be a set where you just draft individual card power level. It's going to be a set where tribes matter. Okay. That's a pretty safe bet, but sometimes it's trickier. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to go a little deeper into a mechanic and say, the question that I'd ask myself is does this seem like the type of mechanic that rewards me for having more of it in my deck? And some do and some don't, right? Like if I looked at allies, I would say this seems like the type of mechanic that says I want as many allies as I can get, maybe. But, if I look at a card like, or at a mechanic like Exploit from a few sets ago, I look at that and I say, I don't think that this necessarily gets a lot better just by having a lot of things with Exploit. Now, sometimes there's some overlap, right? Sometimes you look and there's a mechanic that's just very good. And so you do, of course, want to get as many of those as you can, but it's not because the more of them makes them better. It's because they're just good cards and you want as many good cards as you can get. Something like Awaken comes to mind for that. Awaken is just a powerful mechanic. Another one that comes to mind are Morphs. And even though Awaken and Morph are powerful, and yes, you probably do want to get quite a few of those in your deck if you can, just because they're flexible and powerful and good, it's not like having more Morphs necessarily makes your deck that much better. Yeah, there's some benefits of,
There's a little concealment bonus, but
yeah, you do get some bonuses like that of people not knowing what you have. But it's not like there's, the cards don't say for every morph or for every face down morph creature, they all get bigger or they get cheaper to cast or whatever. Unless you have one of those enabler type cards, the mechanic in and of itself is insular. It is just either good or bad. Depending on the card, you can make the thing, but you don't get rewarded for having multiples in most scenarios. And that's the same thing with Awaken. It's like, again, there will be cards that will sometimes award you for having that. Tidecaller comes to mind here. But Awaken on its own is either just good or not on each individual card, and you'll take as many as you can get. The key is when you come into the set, you have to look at that and process that information. You have to say, okay, there's cards that care about devoid or colorless or getting things ingested or whatever. And then there's cards like Awaken. And what's the difference between these two? And the difference is one of them does want critical mass and as many as you can get, and the other one doesn't seem to. Now, these are things that I would basically flag. And then as I start to draft the set and talk to my friends and listen to podcasts and such, I'll start to piece together what the puzzle actually looks like. But I'm going to have an assumption going in based on logic that I'm willing to throw out if shown otherwise. But that until then, I'm going to assume, yeah, I don't really need to have 10 exploit creatures in my deck because I still need to have things to exploit, for example. And again, I'd be willing to be proven wrong. But this is really important because this is going to be one of the things that you need to know about a format as you get better at it is this a synergy format or is this more like an individual power level format?
And the advantage of figuring out whether it's synergy versus power is that you can do it relatively quickly. It doesn't take very many drafts before you're like, look, I tried the flagship uncommons. I tried stacking up a bunch of the commons. These decks, just didn't work out. You can, and again, I'm not saying it has to be literally you drafting the entire time. You can also talk to other people who have drafted and put that together. But it didn't take very many times of trying to make a black-green sacrifice deck work out before I realized it just wasn't a consistent thing. Like there are good versions of the deck, but it's not really a deck. It's not on my list of decks I will willingly draft. It's on the list of decks I will draft if I'm backed into it. And
right.
A little trickier is going back to our first point, which is how fast is a format. So some kind of red flags you want to look for is what does the removal look like? If the removal is expensive and bad, or even just expensive, sometimes expensive and good, it still does push you towards the format being faster and cheaper cards being better. For example, Throttle is a great card. It's, 5 mana to give a creature -4/-4, or serviceable at the very least. It doesn't really punish 2-drops very much at all. And even something like Flatten, which is a great removal spell, that's 3 and a black for -4/-4. That card also didn't really punish 2-drops. It was just a good mid-range removal spell. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of cards within that band, and very few like Shocks. Shocks are really important, or 2 mana like pacifism type cards like Tightening Coils. Cards like that are what punish 2-drops. The fact that in Battle for Zendikar there's Fortified Rampart, there's Tightening Coils, and there's even like Outnumber, which can be cast on turn 4. So there's also Benthic Infiltrator, Touch of the Void. These are a lot of 2 to 3 mana cards that deal with creatures. That's part of the reason that Battle for Zendikar does not reward you for playing a bunch of 2-drops. Like your cards just get blanked. Kozilek Sentinel, 2 mana 1/4. There's just so many common 1/4s and 2/3s and all that sort of thing. Yeah, Stonehaven Medic's a 2 mana 1/3.
Right.
Look at all these cards. These cards should kind of clue you into like, drafting random 2-mana tutus doesn't seem as good of an idea here.
Yeah, it's hostile environment for them.
Definitely. And also look at where's the power. Cards like Ruin Processor are very strong, and as it turns out, Ruin Processor is one of the better commons overall. Also, Awaken spells, like you mentioned earlier, Awaken spells are powerful. They're kind of expensive. These kind of push things towards it being a slower format, and Battle for Zendikar are certainly on the slower side of formats.
Yeah.
So it's got a lot of cards which punish 2-drops, and it's got a lot of cards that reward 5+ drops. So again, there's no hard and fast rule here, but what you're trying to do is look for trends and look for the sort of things that would clue you in a certain direction. You're going to draft and you're going to see how things actually play out, and it's a constant reevaluation. You're just constantly getting this information and evaluating it and looking at what decks look like. One of the easiest things you can do is when people post pictures of decks, look at what the curves look like. I bet if you took it's easy to find pictures of what decks look like online, like the subreddit people post decks all the time, for example. Or if you have a Magic group, I highly encourage you to have like a Magic Facebook group with a bunch of your friends who play Magic, where you can just post sealed decks and draft decks and talk about it if you know a bunch of people who care about limited. And if you look at these decks, you're going to see it in battle. Tons of decks that have like 0 to 2-2-drops.
Yep.
And once you start looking at it, you're like, nobody has any 2-drops. Or if they do have 2-drops, they're Fortified Ramparts and Tightening Coils. Like, maybe I should be taking 5s and 6s and 7s. Those seem like what's going to decide games.
Yeah, totally. And, the key here, of course, is to keep your eye open and keep that information flowing. And then you'll start to get an idea whether a set's synergy-based or if it's more individual. Moving along for metagame knowledge, another thing you're going to keep an eye on is one type of card better than normal, right? Sometimes flyers are very good in a set, and sometimes they're less good. Sometimes walls, your defensive creatures tend to really overperform where normally you kind of overlook them. You'll have creatures that are unblockable occasionally, and sometimes they're great. You'll get a 2/2 or 2-powered unblockable creature, and it just is a major issue that has to be dealt with at some time. And other times, it just doesn't line up well with the removal in the set. It's got 1 toughness, and there's a few different ping type effects, and they just don't ever seem to stick around. You're going to want to keep an eye on that.
That's a huge one, by the way. The 1 toughness test.
Yes.
Because some formats have 2 to 4 commons that punish 1 toughness creatures, and then I'm just like looking at 2-1s and thinking like, no, not again.
Not again.
But some formats just have 0 because it's just not something that shows up every set. Sometimes you're like, 2-mana 2/1 and 2-mana 2/2, same card.
Yeah, totally. And actually, we'll talk about that in just a second here too. A thing I call the magic number. But just finishing up the point about, are certain cards better? Maybe there's something with graveyards. Whatever. Just keep your eye out for like, hey, this looks like it might be a little better than it normally would be, and you want to make sure not to just typecast cards as that type of card's bad. Take a look at Fortified Rampart and Battle for Zendikar. That type of card's generally not a high performer, a 0-powered wall for a couple of mana, even if it does have a lot of toughness. But it does good work in this set, and that's the kind of card that is easy to dismiss and then end up playing a lot more often than you thought. What I was talking about a second ago, Luis, to hit up your point there, was the magic number, and I just haven't really ever come up with a better name for it, but this is the number of toughness that a creature needs to be able to dodge a lot of the removal and combat situations in a given format. Again, we've been using Battle for Zendikar as an example for this stuff. It's 4. Like if your creature has 4 toughness, it's generally going to stay alive. It dodges some removal spells, a common that 3 toughness doesn't, and for whatever reason, they tend to stick around on the battlefield a lot longer than their 3 toughness friends. And there's a big difference between 3 toughness and 4 in this set. And there's been other sets where the difference is 3. It's 2 toughness is easy to kill, and for whatever reason, 3 toughness is a lot harder to kill. And again, I don't want to use these examples too much, but original Zendikar was like that. If your creature had 1 or 2 toughness, a lot of the removal spells at common and uncommon would be able to kill it. But once you got to 3 toughness, the list shrunk down a lot. So and like I said, it's a combination of not just removal spells, but also like in combat where, a 4 toughness creature might, be able to block profitably or at least hold off, something smaller where a 3 toughness would be like a trade. You'll want to keep an eye out for little things like that too, like the magic number.
And again, this becomes a lot more clear just a little bit into the format. There's still definitely rewards for learning this before other people, so you should be on your game here. But besides just the obvious stuff like, hey, the 3 of the common removal spells kill things that are 3 or less toughness, and those are things most people are going to look for. Also, just look for what are the creatures people play most. What are the valuable creatures, and how does this stack up against those creatures?
Yeah, and what we're going for here, right, is again, if you're going to master a set, I should be able to walk up to you and say, is this format slow or fast? Is it a cabs or an Uber style set? Is this a synergy format or a power level format? Is one type of card better than normal in this format? Are flyers really good? I want to be able, if you think that you mastered a format, I should be able to walk up, ask you these questions, and you should be able to snap off answers. Say graveyards matter and flyers are great. Walls suck, and the cheap burn spells are downplayed. I should ask you, what's the magic number? And you should say, maybe you have to think about it. And you say something like, I think it's 3. It's in this toughness, at this toughness, I expect my creatures to live. And carrying that to the next sort of big section are color level evaluations, right?
And I want to, before we move on, I want to say one quick thing, which is the answers to these questions are not always cut and dried. As it turns out,
true.
Battle for Zendikar is a great example. It's part of what spawned this whole discussion between us, is that there were some pretty distinct moments where we felt like we understood the format better. But not every format's going to have that. Like in Battle, flyers are great. They do get a positive modifier when I look at them now. I'm like, these cards are great. They're better than they look. They're higher picks. Not every format's going to have a number that's so clear in terms of what you're calling the magic number, or whether flyers are good or what have you. Some formats it is a little less clear. Just this format just happens to be pretty, something that I believe we can agree on. And as we learned from last episode, if the two of us agree on something, it becomes fact.
Yeah. I don't think that was us, but I'll take it.
All right. That was Owen and Huey, but
yeah. Now your point stands though, that I think the key is that each person who wants to really get good at a format takes the time to come up with their own opinion on it. And, I think in all scenarios, it behooves you to really be flexible and to be able to listen to other people and be willing to modify your opinions. But if you just haven't even considered these things, then I don't think you can really consider yourself at that, high level of understanding of a format. This is the type of thing that I would expect anybody who really feels like they have a deep understanding of a format to have an opinion on. And if we disagree, fair enough. That's something that I think there's room for. But if you just hadn't even considered it, or you just, kind of blank stare, I don't know, then, I think that you're probably, you have a few steps to go until you really nail a format. Go ahead.
Well, it's the sort of thing where, again, you don't have to have come to these conclusions. It's not like, hey, if 3 weeks into the format, you don't know the answer to these 5 questions, then you're failing. Definitely don't think about it that way. But as always, think about the things you should think about. These are the things you should be looking at and at least trying to evaluate to some degree. And if you don't come up with an answer, that's fine. But it's more like, pay attention to them. These are we're trying to give you a whole big framework of clues, and each of them provides a little bit of value. And if you can, have satisfactory answers for some of them, and answers that can change as the format goes on. Don't be afraid to change. But as long as you're looking at these and trying to figure out the answers to them, you're thinking about the format in the right way, whether or not you come to a definitive conclusion.
No, that's a good point. I think the key is that you've thought about it, right? If you just haven't thought about it yet, that's okay. I mean, look, I'm not saying you have to master every format or whatever, but look, if you want to have that deep understanding of it, these are some of the things that you're going to need to have thought about. And I agree with you. You don't have to have, come up with this like ironclad answer, but if you've just never considered if a format is, synergy based or whatever, and you can't answer that question, then you've probably got some more work to do before you have that, that super good grasp on the format, which is, by the way, quite difficult to achieve. Color evaluations, Luis. This is important. We were talking about metagame knowledge. What do you know about the set and how it plays out? Well, you also need to know about the colors, right? You're basically always going to want to have an idea for this, and how important it is going to vary on things like how many colors you play in an average deck. There's a whole lot of different dynamics that go into it, but basically you're going to want to know, you're going to want to know which colors are best. You're going to want to know how they mesh together, and you're going to want to have a good understanding of how to evaluate and rank the colors.
Are there any examples from sets, maybe current ones, where one of the colors stands out as being much weaker?
Yes.
So perfect. Marshall, tell us all.
Yeah. So, in this case, Luis is of course referring to green in Battle for Zendikar, which is, one of the sort of major storylines, I think, for this set as we look back at it, which is the idea that you don't just rank the colors in order and call it a day. There's going to be gaps of varying sizes between colors. So sometimes you'll have a set where, let's say, black is the best color, but it's not just the best color in relation to the next best color, which is, let's say, white. It's twice as good. Not that there's really a number for this, but let's just say it is so much better than the second best color that it is the obvious, if you could pick any color, that's the one you would take. You would never look back, and it's just that simple. And then black, blue, green, and red are all grouped up together very closely, where you'll have people argue that red is actually better than white, even though it's the second best color, right? And so some people, so those are relatively interchangeable. In Battle for Zendikar, what we have is some number of, some grouping for the first four, and then a rather large gap down to the last one, which happens to be green in this set. And this is really important knowledge, for what you're trying to do here, for what we're trying to teach here, is that you can't just say in your head, I think red is the best and black is second, and then green, white, and blue in that order. That helps. That is a good framework. But if there is a big disparity between any of the two colors, or even multiple pairs of colors, you're going to want to know that. Because if you just say green happens to be the worst, there's plenty of formats where that means that green is perfectly playable. It's just not quite as good or as deep as the other colors. Where if you say green is the worst in Battle for Zendikar, the worst color, then now you're talking about like, you should try to avoid this if at all possible range, which is a much different sentence.
Definitely. And it's the sort of thing where you aren't always going to have clear answers. You're not always going to have green in Battle for Zendikar where you're like, well, this is a 2 out of 10, or 1 out of 10. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't want to get back into the debate whether you should ever draft green, but the fact that that's a debate shows you where people stand on this.
Yes.
I would say most formats have a range, and each color, and there is a spread, right? And almost every format, there are some colors that are better than other colors, just because the odds that all the colors are equally balanced is just very, very, very low. It's just very difficult to do that. But rarely is the spread so wide as it is currently. Like I would say in Dragons, even though I ended up blue-black every single time, that has nothing to do with the actual strength of the colors.
Personal preference, perhaps.
Maybe, who knows? If only I had listened to a podcast about common traps and overvaluing cards of a specific color. But like in Dragons, if you could tell me any combination of two colors that you ended up as, and I wouldn't be like, how did you end up there? It's more like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And that's just how most formats are. And I want to stress this again. There's not always going to be a clear right or wrong answer, but what you should look at is what are the different colors good at? What are the different colors common? Here's where commons are super important. What are the different colors commons look like? What do the different colors decks look like? And the reason that Battle for Zendikar green fails on so many axes is that the commons are bad and the decks are bad, and the things green's supposed to be good at, it's not good at in this set, like mana fixing. Natural Connection is just not a great card.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's funny because this is one of the gaps that I see between myself and the way that a lot of professionals approach this type of thing, is that I actually don't put a lot of weight on ranking colors. Like, I couldn't tell you what my rank is for Battle for Zendikar. I don't really care because it doesn't really matter. Right now, if I was going to play in the Pro Tour and I only had a couple of weeks to prepare, it would matter a lot to me. Right. I need to get that information in that sort of bulk fashion where I need to have a structure to what I'm doing as I go in. But when I do a booster draft, I'm not thinking about that kind of stuff. The thing that I want to know is there a big disparity somewhere? Like the knowledge that green has fallen off a lot, or going back in time that, let's say red and black were the two best colors in Zendikar or whatever, to keep using that as an example. I do want to know if there's a big gap somewhere where one color is unplayable, or one color or two colors are way better than the rest. That is important knowledge to me going into a format, but it quickly dissipates because, once you have a decent idea of that, as long as the colors aren't grossly out of whack, you're going to draft the best deck that you can. And the colors themselves aren't going to be super important, because what really matters, of course, is, well, what got opened in your draft, right? I mean, that's going to affect that just as much. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that you should also consider that some colors are just better suited in certain sets to be support or secondary colors rather than primary colors. We've seen this in sets pretty consistently. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, occasionally there's a subset of good cards, but the color's not quite deep enough. And the cards are often easy to cast, like a single mana symbol, colored mana symbol type situation. And those ones often end up being the secondary color attached to one of the other colors. And sometimes that happens in a set, and it's okay. It's just a nice thing to know when you're thinking about evaluating the colors for a set.
And again, going back to green, because it's actually a good example of a support color. In a lot of sets, green can help set up other colors well because it has good acceleration and fixing. And just the fact that if Natural Connection costs 2 mana, if it was Rampant Growth, let's say just a sorcery speed Rampant Growth, straight up 1 and a green, search your library for a basic, put into play tapped. I think the green would be a lot better because it would enable the converge decks in a much stronger fashion. But the fact that it's not means that a traditional support color is kind of losing some amount of its value. Blue is another example of, well, a color that's often undervalued. That's just one of Blue's tropes for whatever reason. But
undervalued?
Well, I blue always looks weak and then ends up being really good.
I see what you're saying. Okay. I was going to say, like, blue's like the most popular color, I think. But
well, it is right now, certainly. But blue frequently does look like it's underpowered. It just turns out its cards are not as obviously powerful.
Yep.
Blue's also traditionally a good support color because it's just playing a couple bounce spells in your deck is always just great.
Yep.
And
totally.
trying to figure out...
That happens all the time.
Yeah, and trying to figure out where colors land on, well, that spectrum is definitely kind of the challenge here. And if you can get a good sense of where the colors land, and like you said, most importantly, where the disparities are, then that informs you too. Because sometimes a color might have an A+ card, but you'll take a B- card over it because that color is just so far 5th place that you just don't want to be it.
Yep, and that is, and you're going to need to know that. And I mean, most people learn that by doing, right? They like play a deck and they're like, this deck sucks. And then they play another deck and they're like, this deck sucks too. And they both had green in it. What's going on here? And, they'll quickly realize that the cards just aren't coming together. But something to keep in mind for sure as you kind of travel down this road. So we've talked about metagame level knowledge, right? Knowing what's going on within the set and how it works fundamentally. We've talked about color level evaluation. How good are the colors in relation to each other? What do those gaps look like? Now we come to a very important one. It's card evaluation, card level of evaluation. So now we're down to individual cards where you're going to start out in a vacuum or close to it, right? You're going to have, I mentioned earlier that, Luis and I will look at the mechanics and start to form some opinions ahead of time, but we're not really, putting that cake in the oven yet until we're ready to actually start getting cards in our hand and drafting, because that's when you're going to really feel, how did this turn out? We're just have predictions and ideas and hypotheses in our head going. But as the set progresses along, your evaluations are going to morph into more useful and correct takes on the cards. You're going to start to say, okay, what I originally thought about this card was true, and I'm going to kind of start locking that in as a good card. Or you're going to say, I looked at this card and I really thought something about it and I missed something, or it doesn't seem to be panning out. I'm going to keep looking into that.
I was hoping that we would talk about how to evaluate cards well, because I could certainly use the help.
I try to put less emphasis on pick orders or list of cards because I just find those difficult to apply in real life. I just don't I think that they're a good way to dump a lot of information on somebody that needs it in a short period of time, but they're not a great way to go deep on a format or really have a thorough understanding of how a format works. For me, it's once you get a couple of picks into a draft, those lists often get tossed out the window anyway, because things like mana curve and, you're talking about synergy level decks that will take, again, weaker cards that help the synergy to make the overall deck better rather than stronger individual cards that don't do that. So then, and making lists it really gets muddy when you do that. If you know each card, what it does and how it fits into a format, that's going to get you to that mastery level. And it's harder. I mean, obviously it's harder than looking at a list that, you have to like actually take the time to play with and get to understand each card, or each relevant card at least. But to me, that is the way that you get to that point. Let's go through some categories of card level evaluations and how they're going to differ, and the things that you're going to be considering when you look at them. The first one that came to mind was removal, right?
Yeah, so clearly removal just defines any limited format. We multiple times referred to like, how does this interact with the common removal, or what is how the common removal dictates the speed of the format. All those things are just true, because removing your opponent's threats, or how your threats are going to be removed, that's kind of the whole game.
Exactly. I mean, you're going to need to know which removal is the premium removal, which of the removal fits the description of being playable, and which doesn't, or at least doesn't make the cut most of the time. You're going to want to know all of the playable instant speed removal as well, if you're going to master a format, right? Like, think about that. How good at a format can you be if you don't know what the instant speed removal is, so that when you get into a situation where you may need to do a double block, but there's some mana available, or you're in a combat scenario where you're going to maybe fire off a pump spell or make a risky attack, you have to know what the removal is that you could be facing at that time. That is an absolute baseline to get really good at a format. You just must memorize those. And the really cool part is, it's not nearly as hard as you think. I remember when I first started playing Limited, Luis, it was a black hole, man. I thought anything could happen, because I, at that point, wasn't at the point where I was looking at sets as a whole. I was just taking the cards individually at face value as they were played against me. But what that meant was that when I got into a situation, like I said, a tricky combat situation or something along those lines, I had no idea what could happen. Somebody could fire off a lightning bolt.
That's exciting. You just get into a combat. You're just like,
it was exciting, and it also
all right, I'll block your 4/4 with my 5/5.
Yeah,
let's see what's gonna happen.
Fingers crossed.
You
right?
won't believe what happens next.
triple this one weird trick. So here's the one weird trick that actually does fix this.
Drafters hate him.
is you can go, like, the site I like to use is called magiccards.info, and you can do a search on the set that you're looking for, and you can just look in the colors you want to look into. It can be all the colors if you want, and you can filter by instant and just look at all the instants. And then what you can do is you can say, okay, well, that's not a removal spell. That's not a removal spell. So you're taking out, a bunch of cards that just don't, that happen to be instants, but they just don't fit the description of being removal. And then you've got a subset of cards, which is not going to be as big as you think it is, trust. And then on top of that, you can take away the ones that aren't playable, because occasionally there'll be some in there that just never end up making the cut, and you just don't ever have to play around them. Or you can make a footnote on them, but they're just ones that won't show up very often. Something like Scour from Existence or whatever, which it isn't that common that you need to play around a combat situation where somebody has 7 open mana. And when they do, you'll probably have that little flag go, oh yeah, right, there's also this card. So now that you've got that subset of cards whittled down to just that list, it's not as big as you think, and all you have to do is memorize those as far as the removal goes. And boom, you're already a big step of the way forward on getting really good at a format, because every time you get in that scenario, you take a minute and you jog your memory and you say, what removal could my opponent possibly have here with 3 mana, 2 of it black, 1 of it red? And you're going to go through your mental catalog and you're going to say, nothing. There's not a single removal spell in the format that punishes me here, so I'm going to go ahead and double block, right? And maybe the one you come up with is an uncommon that you didn't see in the draft. Well, maybe it is worth the risk of still double blocking and just saying, all right, well, if you got it, you got it. You got to show it to me, though, because I can't just keep taking hits from your creature, right? You get into these scenarios where now you have the knowledge to start weighing out each side of the scale and figuring out, how do I want to actually proceed in this game? Where until you have that, little book of knowledge in your head, you just can't make those decisions effectively. The next section I have, by the way, is pretty much the same. It's combat tricks. And this is the same. You just have to know all the playable instant speed combat tricks in a format if you're going to master it. It's the same thing as the removal spells. You need to know those. You also will want to know the removal spells that are not instant speed. Those do come up often. They are important to what type of strategies are viable, what type of deck you want to build, that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to need to know those. But really the key is those instant speed ones are the ones that are going to punish you for making mistakes that you didn't know you were making. And they're going to reward you for making good plays because you know that there's certain options that just don't exist for your opponent.
And you really can't say you've mastered a format until when your opponent attacks, you can just look at the mana they have available and just kind of know what they could have.
Which, by the way, it gets so much easier.
It really does.
I can just do that now. And when I first started playing, I thought, how do people know any of this stuff? Like, I can't remember what the creatures do, and they just know, you know?
I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. Most people have. You talk to someone who maybe they played Magic, they don't anymore. They played Magic for like a couple months or whatever. They're like, oh, you played Magic tournaments. They're like, wait, do you have to know all the cards? And it's just like, yeah, you need to know a lot more than that. But yes, you need to know all the cards. And it's mind-blowing to people who don't play Magic to think that you really memorized 300 cards.
Yes.
Because imagine going into a test. You're about to sit down and write down, identify and write down a bunch of cards. That it sounds way worse than it is. But honestly, if you play enough, if you watch enough videos, if you watch enough coverage, if you just, get acquainted with the set, eventually you're like, oh, they have one white, one green. Okay, well, they could have, Lythermancer's Focus, Gideon's Reproach, Swell of Growth, that,
Yeah.
And
it just comes to your head.
You just don't have to worry about it anymore.
It's weird. I don't even think about it anymore in that way. Like those things just pop in my head, and I'm not like, I don't even have to do that trick. I used to do that. I used to go look them up to make sure that I didn't miss anything, but now it just happens. It's weird. I think that your brain starts to flag those on its own when you're going through the set as possibilities. And I mean, sure, I get stung every once in a while early in the set where I'm just like, oh, right, that card. Like I remember reading it. I hadn't have it played against me yet, and it just blows me out once, but never again. I'll remember it after that.
Certainly, and I would be surprised if most people didn't have the set memorized at least unconsciously. Again, it's very different. Like, I don't know if I could write down every single card on a piece of paper, but I certainly know every card. And a lot of people will. And you'd be surprised at how good your brain is at memorizing things, even if you don't think about it. So a couple weeks into the format, maybe a little longer, depending on how much you play, you'll kind of get into this zone. And that's definitely a level up moment. And that's something that you can work towards. Like Marshall said, you can look at lists. That's, one of the many reasons playing online has advantages. When someone attacks, if you have enough time, you can literally look at all the list of the tricks they could have. Yes. And that's part of why, when you're playing live, I recommend writing down cards your opponent has played, because at the very least you can know, well, what 4-drops could my opponent play next turn, and just, have a handle on that. So this is less like analysis, because you don't really have to understand the format to know which tricks they have available. This is just straight up like learn the tricks that are available.
Yeah, this is just memorization. I also want to mention before we move to the next category, which is another very important one, is that it does get easier. If you find that you struggle with memorizing cards and doing that, and you're relatively new, I will tell you it gets easier. And the way that I figured out that it gets easier is Magic feels very, very big and open-ended and wide when you first start, and it's not. You're going to start to figure out a lot of patterns and heuristics that you're going to see over and over again, and you're going to start to apply. Oh, that's a red burn spell for the format. Well, what's different about this one? And it's not a brand new card that you've never considered before. It's a different version of things that you've probably seen in the past, or it has a twist on it. And what I found is that my brain needed to start cataloging these sort of modular chunks of information, and then it puts them together. And that's how we know the card sort of intuitively, without, like, I might, like you said, might not be able to like literally write the card out, but I know exactly what it does and how it works. And the reason is that when it's the first time you've seen a 2/3 or a card with first strike, you're like, what does that do? Okay, a 2/3 does 2 damage, and it takes, and you're kind of processing through those things. But then once you get what First Strike does, you can just apply First Strike to any creature and automatically understand what it does. So that little modular piece is sort of tucked away. And whenever you see that in the future, you just know what it does. There's no thinking involved with seeing that a creature has First Strike. You're like, oh, that one has flying. I know what that does. And it gets even more granular for you. And all of a sudden, you'll note that most Magic cards are just pieced together chunks in different forms and with a twist. And so you'll usually have to add on one or two new things when a set comes out. And once you grasp those, you're good to go. And so again, I mainly meant this as by way of encouragement for people that are newer and having a harder time with that. It does get easier. Trust me, just stick with it.
It's also the sort of thing, like everything we're working towards here, where it's not like you study, there's a test, you have to know it by a certain day, or you reach a eureka moment. It's just gradual. You just want to get into the mindset of thinking this direction of, trying to put these patterns together and trying to at least have a goal to work towards. And that's our goal, is that we give you a framework to evaluate things. And part of that framework is, try to prioritize memorizing these things. Don't beat yourself up if you can't do it right away. Don't worry about not having an easy time of it. It just, as long as you're headed that direction, that's really all you can ask for.
Yes, and you will get there. Trust.
It's easier than it sounds. I tend to harp on this, but your subconscious is very powerful. If you give it some direction, it'll fill in a lot of the blanks.
Look, man, I read the book you recommended. What more do you want from me here? Next is creatures, right? Again, we're talking about card level evaluations. We talked about removal and combat tricks, memorizing the instant speed one specifically. Creatures, look, this one's obvious. It is critically important that you know what all the creatures in the set do and how they fit in their environment. The good news is you get to read them, right? Like, it's not the same thing of like getting blown out. They're going to cast your spell and you can pick up the card and read it early in the format. But by the time the format's matured, you just need to know all of the creatures. I don't really think there's much more to be said than that, but you have to have an understanding of what the creatures do, how they affect the board, how they fit into the different strategies. You need to know. I mean, the creatures are easily the most important thing in Limited are creatures. I've put removal and combat tricks above it in this scenario because I think that the creatures are fairly self-explanatory once on the battlefield, where removal and combat tricks will come in out of their hand at instant speed and can punish you a lot harder. But make no mistake, creatures are still number one in Limited, and you're going to need to put in a good amount of time figuring out and putting some thought into how good each creature performs, how good it performed relative to how you thought it would, and where it fits into the format. Because most creatures these days do fit in. Back in the day, R&D used to throw us these curveballs. They called them skill testers, and they were just horrible Magic cards. I mean, just unplayable, janky garbage. And it was kind of like this thing that looked like it might be okay, but then it wasn't. And they've gone away from that in a pretty big way. There's few of those around now, and most cards either have a role in the format, whether it's small and a niche type thing, or whether it's big, or the skill testing cards end up being ones that look pretty good and just don't quite make the cut, but aren't horrific.
In general guidelines for creatures, like you said, most creatures are going to be decent. You're going to figure out whether, what the certain breakpoints are, whether, 2/2s are valuable, whether 2/3 is actually surprisingly good. In this set, I would identify like 4/5s like Colostria Nightwatch as being better than I expected, just because it tends to line up nicely against a lot of the things you expect. But if a creature has, there's a reason we call it the vanilla test, and there's a reason we have the vanilla test. And if a creature passes that test, your baseline is that the card is good, or at least playable. And you have to adjust things from there. But 3 mana 3/3 and 4 mana 4/4 there's basically never been a format where those aren't at least decent, if not actively good.
Yep, totally.
So at 2 mana 2/2 it breaks down a little bit. At 3 mana 2/3, these are the more contextual ones. But if you're getting stats equal to the cost you set, once you go above 1, you're usually in pretty good shape. And yeah, most creatures aren't doing anything so complicated that you can't figure that out. You'll just realize that, maybe 4 mana 4/3 is not very good in this set. As it turns out, it's not very good in this set. So,
right. Yeah. So know the creatures. I mean, I think that one, again, I think it's fairly obvious that's important just because of the major role that creatures play in Limited. So now that we get to ones that are a little bit less obvious, a little bit less in your face, mana fixing. right? On card level evaluations, you're going to want to look at the mana fixing options in the set. How much of it is around? Is it even important at all? Like if you're just playing 2-color decks, mana fixing ends up becoming kind of a nice to have item, but not something you really need. Where do you prioritize it when you're drafting? You're going to want to ask yourself these questions and take a look at the cards in the set to figure that out. And you're going to want to have a good knowledge on mana fixing is very important versus mana fixing is kind of passable. Again, is there a ton of it? If it's all over the place, then you don't really need to prioritize it, right? If there's not much of it and it's important, then you do need to prioritize it. And so you'll kind of flesh that out as you go. This is one of the ones that you can look at the mana fixing cards ahead of time, but it is kind of tough to tell ahead of time how important it actually is in a format. I usually find that this is one that I'm aware of going in, but don't feel confident in my answer until I've actually drafted and played quite a bit of a format.
Certainly.
Non-creature spells. This is a vague and broad, category that I put in because I don't want to look, I want to point out here, right? We're trying to say, okay, card level evaluations are important, but we don't want to go into every single type of card, just in sort of the bigger hitters. So non-creature spells like divination, right? Slow, grindy cards that get you card advantage over the long term. What about hand disruption? Is it a format that rewards you for playing cards like Mind Rot or Thoughtseize or something where you're taking cards out of your opponent's hand, either multiples or specific cards? Are counter spells playable in the format? Are they good? Look at the non-creature spells, the type of spells that often have question marks. Luis, you brought up a good example earlier with Ugin's Insight, or a version of it that was just draw 3 cards for 5 mana. This is that category. Is that the kind of card that you want? And you're going to have to piece together other pieces of knowledge about the format. Luis, you brought it up as an example for, well, if it's a slow format, you may want to get away with it. And this is the category here. On your card level evaluations, you're going to adjust those as necessary because, as you pointed out before, there have been sets where 5 mana draw 3 cards would be absolutely great. And there have been sets where it would be bad, like where you just would really not be interested in a card like that very often. And you're going to need to put some time in on those type of cards. Your build around me uncommons are one we're going to get to in a little bit, and some of those will fall in this category as well. But again, this is just you should have an idea for what the spells that we were given in the set, how they fit in, and whether you should be playing them up or down or whatever.
And most of the cards in this category fit into the question, how slow is the format? Because this category really boils down to cards that don't affect the board. They're not combat tricks. They're not removal. They're not creatures.
Exactly.
So they're all the best kind of cards. The cards I really like.
Yeah, the kind you enjoy to play and sometimes are allowed to. So what about bombs?
Bombs are great. You should take them, and you should kind of figure out where they fall on the scale, because some cards that look like bombs end up not being bombs. Rolling Thunder is, I think, a great example of that in Battle for Zendikar, where, the card is great. You're going to take Rolling Thunder a lot of the time, but it's not the best card in the set, and it's certainly worse than a lot of people thought. So trying to figure out exactly how bomby certain bombs are, especially the uncommon ones. The rare ones only have to clear the bar of best uncommon. Once they're clear of that, you're pretty safe. You just take them. But you should kind of know where they are. I mean, there's a big difference between an A- and an A+, even if they're both like bomb level cards.
Exactly.
And trying to nail that down is something that is valuable to do. It really does matter knowing that Grip of Desolation is better than Rolling Thunder. You're going to get a significant advantage if you get to that realization before other people do.
Right. And I just think it's one of those things that you want to put some amount of thought into. I don't think I have it near the bottom of the list here for a reason. It's not super high priority, but you are going to want to consider that. And, the other thing is, you're going to want to consider, is this a bomby format? Right? Like, am I going to need to have answers to these cards? When you're looking at the bombs.
I believe the question is it a Prince or Pauper format?
Yes, that is it. And, that's an important question. And the bombs are going to help dictate that. If you look at the bombs in the format, and they're amazing and hard to deal with and plentiful, well, you're looking at a format that's probably skewed towards the Prince end of the spectrum. If you look at the bombs and, they're good upgrades on the uncommons, or they kind of provide a wrinkle that you wouldn't normally get, but they're not those, just devastating, ridiculous rares. well, then you might be, skewed towards the popper and the thing. So take a look at the bombs and just, kind of get a feel for them as you start to understand the format further and understand their role within the format. Sometimes they take a very prominent role and sometimes they don't. Build Around Me Uncommons is another one I had on the list. You mentioned these a couple times, Luis, already. You said that these are some of your favorite cards. To me, this is one of the things that you're going to want to be aware of, right? Again, we're talking about mastering a format, like really having a deep understanding of it. And while Build Around Me Uncommons generally are not a super important part of, a draft ecosystem, when they are important, they're very important. And what that means is when the deck that they go in is open and you know it and you know how it works and you know when to take the Build Around Me Uncommon and how important it is and how it functions and what the other cards are, you can really take big advantage and be way ahead of your competition if you know about those Build Around Me Uncommons. And, you're going to be looking at, is it good enough? Is it real? Right? Because there's a lot of Build Around Me Uncommons that just don't pay you off enough, but there's a few that do. And again, when they pop up, you're going to want to know it. So pay some attention to the Build Around Me Uncommons in the set and think about, whether there's a real deck to be built around them when it does pop up and whether there's not. Okay. You had something here, Luis, about comparing cards to previous versions that I thought was interesting.
What I'm trying to do here is explain, I think, the most valuable tool in our arsenal of set reviewing cards, which is what do previous versions of this card look like? I mean, Magic's a great game. There's tons and tons of cards, 20,000 cards or whatever it is. You're going to see a lot of the same cards show up, not exactly the same, but very close. Like there's the green fight card, there's the red cheap burn spell, there's the red expensive burn spell, there's the mid-range blue flyer, there's the blue bounce spell, etc.
Yep.
I mean, there's a reason these keep showing up. They make for good sets. They make for good gameplay. And especially at the common level where the range of what you can do, because commons aren't going to have crazy text boxes, is a little lower. You're going to see a lot of retreads and repeats. And why not compare cards to previous versions of cards? Why not compare, Touch of the Void to Lightning Strike to going back to Champions of Kamigawa, Yamabushi's Flame, just all of these cards, Ghostfire, like how many 2 in a red or 1 in a red deal 3 damages are there? There are lots.
Mm-hmm.
They've all been good and limited. So in the next set, when you see 2 in a red deal 3 with some set specific mechanic, guess what? It's going to be good and limited.
Yep.
And the odd set where it isn't, that will be a first, but maybe that'll happen. Who knows? I'm still going to bet on it being good. And this is a good tool because if the card in this slot, like the cheap red burn spell, if this is always good, then why don't you just start assuming it's always going to be good, assuming the card doesn't do anything really too strange, and then go from there. You've got free information.
Totally.
Why not use it?
It's a great shortcut. I mean, it takes the weight of having to actually experience the card or talk to your friends, and you just assume that it's good. And yeah, you're willing to be proven wrong, but the fact that it's kind of never happened means you're probably not. And you can just set that aside as, okay, that card's good. I'm happy with where that exists on the power structure here, and I can start focusing on things that are a little more tricky or a little bit more not understood for me.
And where it can get dangerous is when previous versions were good, but this one is not. Unnatural Aggression is the perfect example for that. That is the green fight card from Battle for Zendikar, which was kind of a bust.
Yeah, you know what? I got a thing I want to try, Luis. So I know that you've been writing, what do you call them? Redos?
Yes.
Set redos on Channel Fireball, which is where you've gone back and taken a look at your written set reviews for the website and kind of gone back and revisited them and say, this is one that I would change, or, this is how this ended up being. This is why I thought that. And I thought, well, we'll touch on that on the show as well. And so what I want to do is I'm actually going to play what we said about Unnatural Aggression during our set review. So we're kind of taking ourselves and going back in time, to put ourselves in the mentality of who we're really addressing here, which is somebody who is coming into a format, which we are, of course, that person every new format along with all of you, but we can actually hear from ourselves when we were in that exact situation. So let's listen in on what we had to say about natural aggression or unnatural aggression. This next one is an important card, I think, for green. As we know, green doesn't get, direct removal these days, or really ever. And this one's called Unnatural Aggression, and this is the fight card for the set. And we've seen these pretty consistently from most Magic sets for a few years now. It's 2 and a green for an instant at common. It's got Devoid, but it says target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. Now, it's got an extra rider here. It says, if the creature an opponent controls would die this turn, exile it instead. And then that goes back to what we were talking about with that whole processor ingest thing that we'll come into more as we see some of the other colors. But the key here is that we've got the fight card for green, and it's a little different. It's Devoid, but it's 2 and a green and an instant speed one. So what do you make of Unnatural Aggression, Luis?
This is about as vanilla of a fight card as you get. Like, it exiling their creature is an advantage, clearly, but it's worse than a lot of the bonuses we've seen, like Wild Instincts, for example, that gives +2/+2 for an extra mana. Like, I would rather have that card, I think. Mm-hmm. So, this being an instant is nice. The fact that it's instant does set up some pretty cool turns. Overall, though, this is about as good as green gets for removal in general. I mean, its common fight card tends to be pretty good, tends to be a higher pick, and I don't think it's any exception. I think this is gonna end up being like a B-. It's just gonna be one of the reasons that you want to be in green is because you have some of these unnatural aggressions.
Yeah, I gave it a B. My thinking is just that, look, if you put it on the scale with air quotes real removal spells, it doesn't hold up. But this is what green gets, and this one even is an instant, which does open up some doors that green often doesn't have the ability to walk through. And so far from what we've seen from green, there's a lot of beefy creatures out there, which makes this even better. So that's what we had to say at the time. We gave it in the B range for a grade. And as you can see, it did not hold up, right? Sometimes
I would give this card a D+ at this point.
Yeah, I have it in the D+ range also. I mean, it's tough because it is in the worst color, so that kind of drags it down.
That definitely
but
colors
it's also just not that good.
Right. There's two things going on. One is that we have a better picture of where the colors rank, so
yeah,
we can't unsee that. We know that green is bad, so we're looking at Unnatural Aggression and thinking like, wow, this card's crap. Also, we know that this card's not as good as we thought it was. Like, even if you took that part aside, it's definitely worse than we thought. And in this case, I think it was, at least for me, because the green fight card is generally good. It's been good basically every single time. Actually, I don't remember a single time where the green fight card wasn't good. This might be the first time. And that is the sort of thing that using old versions of cards or comparing them can lead you astray. That being said, it's overall a very, very useful tool. You should use it. Just be aware that there are some limitations.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting example because I use that tool all the time, but it's just it is good to know that occasionally it doesn't hold up, and you'll want to stay sharp. Like it's for us, like that's a lesson learned. I'm like looking at it like, okay, we got to make sure that we don't get too stuck on a path of like, well, this is that card, so it's good. But I will tell you that normally it's like 80-85% effective type thing. All right, I'm going to move us along here, Luis, to archetype level evaluations. Again, we've talked about cards, colors, metagame, and this is where you start to get into the meat of the set. This is, you're going to have an idea for what the headliner archetypes are in a format when you come in, but you won't know which ones are the best or which ones are viable or better than the others. And there's also going to be less obvious archetypes in a set that you just hadn't considered yet. Again, using Battle for Zendikar as an example, the blue-white Flyers deck just wasn't apparent to me. I mean, I would think it's in many formats, but this isn't one that I would assume that a deck like that would exist in, and boom, there it is. This is really important to mastering a set. You just have to know which archetypes are best, which ones you're better off avoiding, what they look like, how they go, when to switch into different archetypes, and what are the cards that allow you to switch or are worth switching for. You need to know this so that when a card comes late, if it's a specific archetype type card, you'll know that archetype's open. You're going to want to know what matters. Tribal cards, artifacts, colorless, big expensive creatures, small cheap creatures, enchantments, whatever it happens to be, something matters in most sets that are synergy driven, and you're going to want to know. The ones that aren't synergy driven are going to be driven usually by color pairs and which ones complement each other the best, and so you're going to want to know that too. So these archetype evaluations are very important, and they're a very important part of the big picture as well.
Definitely. And most sets, like you said, they have things that you can, at the very least, you can see what was intended. And whether they get there in draft, well, that's kind of our job to figure out.
Exactly. Now, I wanted to use a couple of examples before we take off for the day here, and I want to use Battle for Zendikar. I'm going to bring us back in time another time here to listen to us talk about Broodhunter Worm, because one thing that we thought might be true, but we weren't quite sure to what extent, was how synergy based is Battle for Zendikar. And this goes back to, understanding the archetype evaluations and that kind of dovetails about the metagame knowledge as well. And so this is what we had to say, and I think a very reasonable take on Broodhunter Worm. What's next? Broodhunter Worm is 4 mana, 3 and a green, for a worm at common. It's a 4/3. I'm done talking.
Yeah, I mean,
there's flavor text. That's it.
That's all it does. That's all it needs to do.
Yeah, I agree.
This card is like a textbook C.
Yes.
You'll play it. You'll be happy. That's pretty much enough story.
Yes, beat down. It doesn't trigger anything. It's not devoid. It's just a 4/3 for 4. So that's what we had to say about Broodhunter Worm. Pretty straightforward, but as it turns out, it's even lower on the scale than we thought, right? And this, again, it kind of falls into that same category of, well, it's green and that does hurt it in this set. But also, what we said wasn't untrue about the card, but it still just never really found a home.
Are you going to play any times when we were right about a card, or just the ones we were wrong?
Well, the thing is, I actually was pretty proud. I listened to a lot of the evaluations we did, and we were I was really quite happy with how we did on that. Even a few of them that I had remembered that I thought we were off on, and we weren't. So I'm actually quite proud about how we did on the set review, especially because this set ended up being particularly tricky. And so I thought I'd pick out a few of the ones that we were wrong on, though, like Broodhunter Worm.
Fair enough. I guess I'll assume that every single one we didn't play for you on the show, we got perfectly right.
That is correct, and it's also a fact. So some of the other things that popped up for Battle for Zendikar. So that one is that this set is very synergy based, and our take on Broodhunter Worm shows that we weren't quite in tune with how synergy based it really is yet, because Broodhunter Worm just simply doesn't fit into any of the strategies. It's not devoid, it's not an ally, etc. Control decks are a thing. You talk about like a Stonehaven Medic or that type of card. You can play slowdown decks in this format. Black-white deck existing, the life gain deck, was a big one for me. I didn't know if it was real or not. I talked about it on the set review like 10 times. Every time something said life gain, I was like, hey, this could be part of that deck. I just don't know yet. And it turns out that it was. But the real turning point for me was when somebody told me that Colostria Healer was good. And when they told me that, I went back and listened in the set review, and what we said about it was exactly what I would say about it now, which is that it's not very good on its own, but in the right home, it might be quite good. And it turns out it did have a home, and it is quite good in that home. And so these are, again, these kind of aha moments that happened for me, and I think you to an extent too, Luis, as we went through Battle for Zendikar. One thing that popped out was how good Devoid is, right? Just like the combination of the cards being individually good, and then the sum of them being much, much greater than their parts really popped up. And there's a lot of examples of good cards and that really worked well together. And it just wasn't entirely clear at the beginning.
Right. Devoid really got there. Black-white really got there. Black-green really didn't get there. And that's part of a bigger issue that I think a lot of people have come across, and we've talked at length about, so we're not going to go too deep on it, but green is very bad.
Yep.
Knowing that, you're a lot better at Battle for Zendikar Draft. Just knowing that.
Yeah, totally. It is. It's true.
A big part of that, too, is mana fixing. There's not much mana fixing in the set.
Yep.
There are converge themes. There's 3-color plus allies themes. And it's just knowing that there's not much mana fixing not only does things like make you less inclined to draft converge, but also more inclined to take like Evolving Wild's third pick, which I think is very respectable. So you would not do that randomly. Like, Evolving Wilds in Origins was not a high pick. It's a very high pick in Battle for Zendikar, and there's just a lot of things that go into that. Realizing that is definitely a level up. And kind of like dovetailing on the Devoid answer is also that seven drops are great.
Yeah, they're good. They're castable, they're powerful, and they're desirable.
As low as I am to admit it, 7 drops are really good in this set.
Yeah, we really...
and I hate that I have to keep putting them in my deck, but just, cards like Ruin Processor are just awesome, and they really ended up getting there.
Yeah, totally. Combat tricks, not very important, right? We were coming off of Origins where combat tricks were very good. and the amount of combat tricks you had in your deck, you wanted quite a few of them. But in this set, when we came off of it, we talked about tandem tactics on the set review show, and here I'm going to play what we said about that. Tandem tactics, another combat trick here. 1 and a white for an instant at common, and it says up to 2 target creatures each get +1/+2 until end of turn. And then again, this is just, I'm marking these in my head. You gain 2 life. Like, why? Why am I just randomly gaining 2 life? And again, I think it's because of all these, cards that care about life gain. It's not just for the sake of gaining 2 life, but they're just planting these little triggers here and there to get these life gain shenanigans going. But just on its face, 1 and a white for up to 2 creatures to get +1/+2 in a beatdown deck does work. I mean, that's fine. Like, I would probably play that card.
This card, it has a really high upside. Mm-hmm. It's not hard to get a 2-for-1 off this card, and it only costs 2 mana. And it's up to 2 target creatures. So when you attack their 2/2 when you attack your 2/2 into their 3/3 on like turn 4, you can just cast this by itself. And, and you traded a card for a card, and you gain 2, and you probably traded 2 mana for 3 mana. So that sounds great to me.
Yeah, I'm on board. And these decks just look like they want to be down, right?
Yeah, and it's not hard to set up a board where just casting this gives you if not a 2-for-1, like a 1.5-for-1, like where sometimes it lets you trade up 1 creature, like it lets you trade up a 2/2 into a 4/3, and lets you trade a 3/3 kill a 4/4. So it's not hard to get good value out of that, and that's without counting the life gain. The life gain meaning that it triggers some random things, and it just gains you 2 life. Gaining 2 life intrinsically matters.
It definitely does.
I really like tandem tactics. I have it right up there with all the white removal spells. I think that it's like a C+, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up. I think it actually might be a B-. I think the fact that it's a 2-for-1 so often, and even if it's a 1-for-1, it's just 2 mana. It's not like you spend much time setting it up. So I really want what I really want to do is revisit in like a month or 3 weeks and see where Sheer Drops, Might the Monstrous, Tandem Tactics, and Gideon's Reproach all end up landing, because they're all so close together right now for me.
All right, I'm going to make a list, and we'll do that. We'll visit it again, in 4 or 5 shows from now, and we'll see where they all kind of ranked out after we have a better feel for the format. I'm going to give it a C+ as well.
And looking at tricks like Tandem Tactics, like we definitely were a little higher on that than we would be now, and cards like that would have been fantastic in Origins.
Exactly. And I think that's what we were hung up on, is that it's like Origins, right? And, you look at those type of cards and it's powerful. I mean, Tandem Tactics is a powerful card. It just doesn't fit in the format very well. So anyway, the key here, though, is that I wanted to give some of our aha moments, some of those level up moments that we had as we were working our way towards, attempting to master a set. And, I don't know, I wouldn't say I'm quite there, but I feel like I have a deep understanding of the set. I do.
No, I'm there. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, I can just ask you then, can't I?
See, this feels like an awesome time for this topic because Battle for Zendikar is ripe with level up moments. It's just a set that just has all these extremes. And don't expect every set to be this clear. In terms of like green being so much worse, or some of the decks really getting there, like Devoid being awesome, and the green decks being, like Black-Green Sacrifice, or even just like the multicolor ally decks really not being great. It's usually not that clear, but sometimes it is. Like Origins figuring out that all the uncommon build-arounds are just bad in Origins. It was a disappointing moment, but it was certainly a valuable one. And
absolutely.
Just trying to figure out how you can build towards these results is really important. It's just, these are the things you should look for. Some have more value than others. Identifying which ones are more valuable is also part of the trick. And every set is different, but a lot of the same things are things you can look at and things that you can learn from. And hopefully we're giving you the tools to do so with this episode.
I hope so. And I want to remind you, this is the fun part. I love this. I love doing this stuff.
It really
sounds like work, but this is like what I find so fascinating, and why I'm, why I keep coming back to limited magic over and over again.
Well, I mean, the awesome part about if you do a good job on this, you get sometimes a couple days, sometimes a week, who knows, where you feel like a secret that no one else does.
Yep.
And you feel like, those idiots are taking Undergrowth Champions pick 1 while I'm taking Mist Intruders, or, I know that Colostro Healer is secretly the nuts. And knowing those things is so awesome. It's just so fun to do that. Just even setting aside the fact that you maybe get to win a little bit more, it's just so cool having a this awesome killer strategy that people don't know. And yeah, a lot of people have figured this stuff out. Magic's a big game. There's a lot of people inconsiderately making podcasts and telling people, what they've learned. But that thrill of discovery is really what gets it for me.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, that is going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with Luis and I. I want to mention our sponsor channel, Fireball.com. Make sure you check them out for their sweet sale and also for the Huey tokens and the free content that I mentioned at the top of the show. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can send us an email, lr@lrcast.com, and you can find links to everything that we do, including our streams. We both stream, and the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, all that kind of stuff. We mentioned the Reddit page quite a bit, the subreddit. You can find all the links at lrcast.com for everything related to limited resources. That will do it, though. Again, thanks so much for hanging out, and we'll talk to you next week.
See, this is where you'd expect to hear the sound of a pack opening. But even though that is my topic for right now, I'm going to restrain myself.
Thank you.
Well, it's not for your sake. What I want to bring up is actually the misconception that opening packs for fun is not a good thing. Because, some people on this show think that it isn't a good thing. But I actually have the opinion, and I've been opening a lot more packs recently. Man, opening packs is a lot of fun.
Oh, God.
And, there's really nothing wrong with opening packs. Get back to the fun of Magic. I would highly encourage you to open packs just for no reason but to open packs.
What are you doing?
Look,
this is against the fundamental principles of limited resources. What are you thinking?
I just felt like we were getting a little too serious with that. I feel like getting back to the whimsy of Magic. Imagine when you first learned to play.
Nonsense.
Look, this is a level up episode. This is a level up sign off. Imagine when you
whimsy.
Look, I'm a whimsical person.
God.
I'm guided by my instincts, and I'm just saying, I've had a lot of childlike glee in opening these packs, and I would highly encourage you, especially if you're feeling like you're all you're thinking about is value, and you're very jaded. Just open packs; it's so fun. And even though I'm going to restrain myself and not open packs here, that's not because they won't be opened. My goal is to find someone who will appreciate these packs and give them to them to open. So I'm going to think about ways to do that. Maybe I'll just go down to a local store or something along those lines. But not everything has to be about value. There's value in not trying to always get value.